Hong Kong riot police making arrests and preventing crowds from gathering on the anniversary of the Chinese regime. Activists call the day nothing to celebrate but much to mourn. 2 explosions already occurred this week. On Thursday, a fire broke out at a scenic mountain area in central China, causing 13 deaths. A top scholar describes democracy as poison and an evil cult. One privilege of senior Chinese Communist Party officials is revealed when a recorded conversation goes viral. 2 citizen reporters are still detained after revealing the true situation of the epidemic in Wuhan. And an 88-year-old whistleblower doctor of the 2003 SARS outbreak could still be under house arrest. And the U.S. House Intelligence Committee released a new report on how to meet the challenge from China. And the head of a British spy agency says the West misunderstood China. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Hong Kong riot police are swarming the streets again, making arrests and preventing crowds from gathering. It's the anniversary of the Chinese regime's rise to power. But activists and some residents say it's not something to celebrate, instead calling it a day of mourning.
Hong Kong riot police arrested nearly 70 people on Thursday. It was an effort to stop pro-democracy marchers gathering at the Chinese regime's anniversary celebrations. Police had banned the protest, citing pandemic restrictions on group gathering and outbreaks of violence at previous marches. Hundreds of officers conducted stop and search activities and cordoned off areas. The protests came the same day Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam said stability had returned to the city. Protesters sought to march against Beijing's imposition of a sweeping national security law on Hong Kong.
Today is a day for national mourning. What should we celebrate? Hong Kong has become a place like this. What's worth us celebrating, right?
But there's nothing to celebrate. Chinese Communist Party has stolen the whole China. In the name of dictatorship, they continue their rule. Without any democracy, without any respect for human rights.
Protesters also demanded the return of 12 Hong Kongers. They were arrested at sea by Chinese authorities in August while trying to escape to the self-ruled democratic Taiwan. On Wednesday, relatives of the 12 called for access to their family members who are detained in mainland China. They have so far been denied access to independent lawyers. The father of one detainee broke down in tears.
I don't even know how my children are. Is this too much to ask for? My son is also a Hong Kong citizen. He pays his taxes.
10 of the detainees are facing charges related to pro-democracy protests last year.
Protests in London against the Chinese Communist Party on the CCP's National Day. An increasing number of people are calling out the regime's repressive policies and appalling human rights record. NTD's UK correspondent Jane Wirrell has more.
Calling for an end to the Chinese Communist Party on the CCP's National Day. Protesters are out in London outside the Chinese embassy, and arriving in the early evening was Hong Kong businessman Elmer Yuan.
PRC is not a nation. It's a bunch of gangsters. 90 million of them, dominated by 50 families, crime families, and they've been exploiting the 1.3 billion people, the biggest and the most sophisticated gangster system in the world.
He says the Sino-British Joint Declaration should be null and void and wants to take the Chinese Communist Party to court. The UK government says China has broken the declaration, an agreement that allows Hong Kong to keep its unique freedoms that are not in mainland China.
The court system is good. You have an independent court. I'm going to court to sue the PRC for violating the Sino-British Joint Declaration, and the sovereignty should be stripped from the PRC.
Earlier, outside the embassy, the CCP flag was in flames, Hong Kongers expressing their frustration and attempting to clear up at the end.
The Chinese regime is under increasing scrutiny since the pandemic and the passing of a national security law in Hong Kong. Protesters in London include Hong Kongers as well as mainland Chinese, Tibetans, Uyghurs and Falun Gong practitioners.
Falun Gong, an ancient spiritual and meditation discipline, is still persecuted by the Chinese Communist state after more than 20 years. The regime has this year launched a further campaign of persecution, named Zero Out, to force practitioners to renounce their faith and practice.
To see people actually peacefully protested, I think it's a very effective method as well, because it stopped me today, it stopped me, and I'm still here. Hours later, I came back just as soon as I left work.
The Chinese Communist Party's human rights record is no secret, and more people are calling for its end. Jane Worrell, NTG News, London.
Pennsylvania Representative Scott Perry introduced a bill calling out the Chinese regime. It designates the Chinese Communist Party as a transnational criminal organization. The proposal would eliminate sovereign immunity for Chinese diplomats in the U.S. engaging in criminal activity.
The CCP cannot be given a pass, cannot be absolved of justice just because it's ruling China. And that's what's happened. Because they can declare themselves the legitimate government of China, they're allowed to get away with it. They're allowed to get away with oppression, concentration camps, all kinds of horrific things that you already know about. Whether it's the Falun Gong, whether it's our friends in Mongolia, whether it's taking over Tibet, all of it has to end. And it's criminal activity that must be recognized and stood against by the whole world community, and the United States must lead.
The bill allows the U.S. to apply the RICO statutes to those involved with the CCP. This applies whether they are in China or the U.S. Today is the 71st anniversary of the CCP's takeover of China. Supporters showed up to the stand with the Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, and Tibetans. All of those groups are subject to the oppression of the Chinese regime.
Now we turn to Taiyuan City in China's northern Shanxi province. That's where a fire broke out on Thursday at a scenic mountain area. According to the official report, 13 people died and 15 were injured. The cause of the fire is still under investigation. This year, October 1st, is the first day of China's traditional Mid-Autumn Festival, or Moon Festival, as well as the start of the country's week-long National Day holiday. It marks the Communist Party's rise to power back in 1949. The start of the Mid-Autumn Festival varies from year to year, but this year both holidays fall on the same day. China's biggest social platform, WeChat's chief editor, announced tougher censorship and more rigid controls over its users. Meanwhile, in the U.S., a federal judge issued an injunction against the Trump administration's WeChat sanction.
Chinese social media app WeChat is taking a tougher stance in terms of censorship. In a CCP Mouthpiece TV interview, the chief editor of WeChat, Jin Xuan, said WeChat would crack down hard on accounts, even suspending them permanently. It would target accounts that repeatedly violate WeChat censorship rules and refuse to rectify their speech. One of the victims of WeChat censorship is the CCP virus whistleblower Dr. Li Wenliang. He was punished by Wuhan police because he posted several warnings on a WeChat group, and the police accused him of posting false statements on the internet. His warnings were later proven to be true, and so the authorities had suppressed him knowingly. He later died of the virus. With WeChat, nearly 800 million smartphone owners in China can do pretty much everything in everyday life. It not only includes communicating with family, friends, and business partners, or reading news, but also paying bills, transferring money, and even sending ride-sharing requests, and ordering food for delivery. WeChat has 1 billion active users per month. As WeChat influences Chinese people's life so profoundly, it can sometimes cause severe consequences. Mr. Tang committed suicide after his WeChat account was suspended this August. The 21-year-old young man ran a small grain and oil business. Many of his long-term clients made their payments via WeChat. The suspension of his account caused him great difficulties. Mr. Tang tried to find out why his account was suspended, but for his dozens of attempts, he got no reply. He visited the building of WeChat's parent company, Tencent, but still was not offered any explanation. Finding no solution to his problem and feeling hopeless, he jumped from the 11th floor of the Tencent building and died from the fall. Over in the U.S., a federal judge took the side of WeChat when the Trump administration proposed a sanction against it. According to Chinese law, Chinese companies have to cooperate with China's national intelligence efforts, regardless of where they do business. The Trump administration proposed a sanction against WeChat in August, saying it poses a threat to the U.S. national security. A federal judge has issued an injunction against the president's executive order on the basis the order would harm free speech.
Now we take a look at the current situation of two citizen reporters. Both are being held by authorities for speaking out about the CCP virus in Wuhan months ago. One of them is Zhang Jian, a lawyer from Shanghai. She went to Wuhan in February to talk with local people and employees from hospitals and funeral homes. She uploaded her reports on social media, revealing the authorities' cover-up. In May, she was arrested by police and accused of what they called provoking trouble. Earlier this month, she was sued and her case went to court. Right now, she is in prison protesting with a hunger strike. She insists she did nothing wrong and was only practicing freedom of speech. Another one is Chen Qiushi. He too was arrested in Wuhan in February due to reporting on the situation there. Since then, there was no information on his whereabouts until earlier this month when a friend of his posted an update on social media. His friend said the Procuratorate, or China's Public Prosecutors Department, decided against prosecuting him, but he was still keeping him somewhere under the surveillance of the authorities. And Chinese authorities aren't just cracking down on citizen journalists reporting on the pandemic. A whistleblower who exposed Beijing's cover-up of the SARS pandemic 17 years ago could still be under house arrest. The whistleblower, Jiang Yanyong, is 88 years old. This February, his friends told British news outlet The Guardian that Jiang has been under house arrest since last year. His wife said he has no means of communication with the outside despite his poor health. Like Dr. Li Wenliang, who was one of the first to warn about the CCP virus, Jiang emerged as a national hero for exposing the regime's SARS cover-up. The SARS virus emerged in China's southern Guangdong province in late 2002. Like the CCP virus that swept the globe this year, they both belong to the coronavirus family. And once inside the body, they both target the lungs. At the time, Jiang was a semi-retired senior surgeon at an elite military hospital in Beijing. Number 301, the hospital serves Chinese military and treats top Communist Party officials. In March of 2003, Jiang learned that his hospital leaders met with China's health ministry officials. The leaders were told that SARS had already emerged in Beijing. But with China's most important annual political meeting fast approaching, the hospital leaders were asked to keep the news quiet. In early April, China's then health minister, Zhang Wenkang, said at a press conference that Beijing has only 12 confirmed cases. He claimed that SARS was under control and that it was safe to work, live in, and visit China. Jiang recounted being upset by the health minister's speech. He said at the time he knew at least 80 SARS patients at 2 Beijing hospitals. Jiang tried to alert the media to the issue. He emailed 2 state-run media outlets but got no response. But Western media soon got a hold of the information. Jiang's report was published in a Time magazine article online and was featured as a cover story the following month. Other mainstream media also reported on the story. Several days later, the World Health Organization went to Beijing to investigate the SARS outbreak. Jiang said to hide the true scale of the outbreak, one military hospital moved some patients to a hotel. 2 other major hospitals moved most of their SARS patients into ambulances and ordered staff to drive around Beijing. Less than 2 weeks after Jiang reached out to Western media, Chinese authorities admitted that they covered up the outbreak. The country's health minister and then Beijing mayor were both fired. At first, Chinese media applauded Jiang as a hero, but he soon vanished from media coverage. Now he's closely monitored by authorities and barred from leaving the country. In an interview with The Guardian this February, his wife said he was sickened with pneumonia last year, adding that she was sorry and that it wasn't convenient to say more. There are currently no reports about his condition. Now we turn to real estate in China. According to China Real Estate Enterprises Sales Trading List 2020, China's property market prices are falling. Among the top 20% of real estate companies, 70% of current sale prices are lower than last year, with some prices falling more than 20%. In the first half of this year, more than 90% of real estate companies completed around just 40% of their sales targets. China's second largest real estate company, Evergrande, took the lead in kicking off a big price cut in September. All real estate across the country was sold at a 30% discount. According to reports from China, many speculators are selling their houses with big price cuts. One speculator is selling his 180 properties located in the southwest China city Chongqing. He bought those houses at an average price about $300,000 years ago, and now they are being sold at about $220,000, which is a 25% discount. Now we turn to Xinjiang. There are signs that suppression there could get worse. The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, held a Xinjiang work seminar in Beijing on the last weekend of September. All 7 members of the Standing Committee of the CCP's Central Political Bureau attended the seminar. They are the 7 most powerful men in China and have never appeared together at a seminar about Xinjiang before. Their participation this time is considered a high-profile response to diplomatic challenges from Western countries. The topic of the seminar is to build socialist Xinjiang. Xi Jinping claimed the work in Xinjiang has seen unprecedented achievement and said the CCP Xinjiang strategy is absolutely right and must be stuck with for the long run. The strategy includes so-called religions with Chinese characteristics and core socialist values. This was Xi's response despite international pressure. Recently, Western countries have raised stronger voices against the CCP's suppression of ethnic Uyghur people in the region. The topic was a focus of a recent UN conference, and the U.S. put sanctions on Chinese communist officials involved in Xinjiang human rights abuses. French President Emmanuel Macron also proposed an investigation into the issue. A video clip from one of China's top scholars has gone viral online. In it, he expressed a strong opinion about democracy. He is the Vice Dean of the School of International Relations at a major university in Beijing. In the clip, he describes democracy as poison, totally harmful, and an evil cult. He reportedly made the statement last year while at a university in Thailand, though the video went viral on overseas social media earlier this week. Also in the video, he said many of Thailand's intellectuals were educated in the US and UK. They talk about democracy and freedom all the time. He continued to say that democracy and freedom are useless. He also questioned why people need to vote, saying it can only make things messy. His words have since triggered a huge response on Twitter. One netizen wrote, "This guy puts so much effort into saying that voting is bad. Whatever the Communist Party says is bad must be good." The Chinese Communist Party leaders for decades have enjoyed many privileges that China's ordinary folk don't get to experience. For example, senior CCP officials enjoy special supplies, such as special rice and noodles, vegetables, special tobacco and alcohol, tea, medicine, and water. But an audio recording that went viral recently shows there is another kind of special treatment reserved for only the ministerial level party officials, one that netizens called an eye-opener. The recording was of a conversation between a flight captain and the ground commander. The captain of the flight requested privilege to take off before other scheduled flights because the party secretary of Guiyang City was on the plane. The party secretary is the first man of the city and has even more say than the mayor. The request was rejected by the ground commander because his official rank was not high enough for jumping in line. He must be at the ministerial level or above to enjoy this privilege. President Trump has issued a new executive order on rare earth mining. It directs his cabinet to look into the United States' reliance on critical mineral imports from other countries. Rare earth minerals are used in a wide range of products: airplanes, computers, cell phones, electric power networks, and advanced electronics. The order said America's dependence on foreign adversaries for critical minerals poses a threat, and the reliance on China is particularly concerning. The U.S. imports 80% of rare earth elements directly from China. Agencies will have to come up with strategies to address the threat within 60 days. That could mean tariffs, quotas, or other import restrictions against China and other non-market rivals. It also directs agencies to find ways to support domestic production. The United States used to be the leading producer of rare earth minerals, but China has used aggressive tactics to flood the market and squeeze out competitors. In an implicit pushback for China's Belt and Road investment plans, the U.S. and Taiwan will work together on infrastructure projects in the Indo-Pacific region and Latin America.
U.S. and Taiwan officials made the infrastructure announcement on Wednesday. Washington sees Beijing's Belt and Road initiative as a plan to entrap countries with debt diplomacy. The de facto U.S. Embassy in Taipei said the new plan would promote more resilient supply chains in the Indo-Pacific region.
We will also work hard to cooperate with Taiwan and other economies with similar ideologies to promote the reorganization of the supply chain in the Indo-Pacific region.
Taiwan's Foreign Minister Joseph Wu said it would support investment in infrastructure in the region.
Through cooperation between the public and private sectors of Taiwan and the United States to help those countries in the region to develop their energy industry and infrastructure.
The plan sets up a working group led by the U.S. Treasury Department and Taiwan's Finance Ministry. It will hold its first meeting this autumn. The U.S. and Taiwan said that they are seeking allies to work together and shift their global supply chains from China. The plan also fits Taiwan's new southbound policy. The island is working to boost economic ties with Southeast and South Asia, but cut reliance on China.
Now we turn to the Vatican. On Thursday, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met Vatican Secretary of State Cardinal Pietro Parolin. The meeting comes as tensions flare between the Vatican and China. Parolin was accompanied by the Vatican's foreign minister, Archbishop Paul Gallagher. The Vatican's top diplomatic officials said Pope Francis had declined to meet with Pompeo to avoid meeting politicians ahead of the U.S. election. Recently, Pompeo repeatedly accused the Vatican of putting its moral authority at risk by renewing an agreement with China. The deal states that the Vatican would agree with the Chinese bishops appointed by the communist regime. In a Wednesday speech shortly after arriving in Rome, Pompeo called China the worst country in the world for attacking religious freedoms.
Nowhere, however, nowhere is religious freedom under assault more than it is inside of China today. That's because, as with all communist regimes, the Chinese Communist Party deems itself the ultimate moral authority. An increasingly repressive CCP, frightened by its own lack of democratic legitimacy, works day and night to snuff out the lamp of freedom, especially religious freedom, on a horrifying scale.
As examples, he brought up the Uyghur Muslims of China's Xinjiang region, Catholics, Protestant, house churches, Tibetan Buddhists, Falun Gong practitioners, and more. The U.S. House Intelligence Committee released a new report titled The China Deep Dive that delves into the rise of China as a global competitor. The report details how the U.S. is countering that threat. The report notes that Beijing's response to the global pandemic demonstrated the regime's intent. It prioritized preserving its international image rather than being transparent and helping the world to combat the disease. Beijing also stopped international scientific inquiries into the origin of the virus. Instead, it spread propaganda and misinformation and tried to shift the blame onto the U.S., among others. Under ways to combat the challenge is the need for effective national policy. That includes collecting intelligence so that policymakers can better understand and predict future consequences. The report found that so far, much more is needed to be done to adapt to the risk posed by China. That's to ensure the U.S. will continue to compete with China on the global stage, as well as protect U.S. health and security. Beijing's rapid increase in military spending in the past few years has led to more tension between the communist regime and world powers on the global stage. Head of British Secret Intelligence Service Sir Alex Younger told the Financial Times many Western countries wrongly thought that the Chinese regime would become more like the West. He noted instead the two ideologies are getting further apart. He said the West and China should work towards peace rather than having a Cold War. But he added Beijing must be challenged over the cyber attacks launched on other countries. He said ways Britain could manage the relationship with Beijing includes technological innovation and alliances. He added he believed Britain could maintain what they believe in and have a balanced relationship with Beijing. He said that could be accomplished through dialogue and engagement. The former head of Germany's intelligence agency warned of the risks brought by an authoritarian regime. He told our sister media in Germany, the Epoch Times, socialism and communism are first and foremost totalitarian regimes. Totalitarian means people are not allowed to participate in politics. The rights of freedom are allocated to the individual according to the taste of a politically self-appointed elite. He said such a system, he believes, operates through fear and hope, by preying on people's emotions and dividing society into classes. He added Beijing used that technique to gain power over Europe. He said this worried him greatly when it comes to Germany and warned against doing business with Huawei. He advocated instead for Germany to create its own 5G. That way the country wouldn't have to rely on China, especially when 6G comes along in the future. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.